The US jobs market is in big effing trouble, and it isn't even really about the October payroll report. While hurricanes and strikes have raised issues about the latest update, the actual employment situation was getting worse long before we got here. The revised figures and the current numbers show that summertime was indeed as bad as we thought it was, and maybe even worse. To start with, September's huge soft landing is confirmed estimate is instead proving to be another irrelevant outlier, just like the one in May. What followed May was shockingly bad, thus why the markets reacted the way they did to the economy, not the data. The data has taken a few months to catch up to it. Now that it has, what they show is everything that we've been talking about. For example, the establishment survey now shows that private payrolls after May were under 100,000 in every month but September. In August, private payrolls, now revised, was uncomfortably close to zero. After the outlier rebound in September, the October estimate comes in at minus 28,000. Now there is definitely weather and the Boeing strike in that minus, but there sure wasn't any of that in August. Now all of this spoils the soft landing narrative. So you can see it all over the mainstream. Suddenly the payroll data is noisy, they all say. And while that's true, the noise is always one-sided, such as in September. Through the first 9 months of this year, the BLS has revised away 405,000 job gains out of just 2.09 million. Yeah, that's 20%. And that's even before we get to October. The household survey, which the BLS admits wasn't impacted by storms at all, that one dropped sharply in October, but more importantly is negative for the last 13 months running. Plus, when you account for labor participation, which the BLS does not, the unemployment rate really should be about 4.5% at a new cycle high. This is not about October. The latest numbers, whether or not, merely indicate the well-established, pun intended, previous trend is getting worse. What the establishment survey shows is that first, September was, like May, just one of those noisy positive months that shows up from time to time. And second, the job market stumbled badly, and I mean badly, particularly private payrolls, during the summertime. And where have we heard that before? From the JOLTS estimates to private businesses and what they've been reporting, we've got the carry trading going on in Japan or unwinding in Japan, the income data that I went over a couple days ago, all of it pointing to the same thing that the revised establishment survey plus the October numbers show, was in a labor market and a U.S. economy that stumbled badly in the summertime. The headline establishment survey increased by just 12,000 in the month of October. That was way less than obviously September. It was also substantially below expectations. Expectations were on average for around 100,000, though there was a wide disparity in various expectations because nobody really knew how the weather would impact the hurricanes and everything else. However, despite that, the number came in well below expectations because there is material weakness that isn't just related to hurricanes or the Boeing strike. What the BLS actually said about the hurricanes was, in October, the household survey was conducted largely according to standard procedures and the response rates were well within normal ranges. The initial establishment survey collection rate for October was well below average. So that's where you get this sudden mainstream impulse about noisy data. However, collection rates were similar in storm-affected areas and unaffected areas. So the BLS is even saying that the collection rates don't have anything to do with the hurricanes at all. A larger influence on the October collection rate for establishment data was the timing and length of the collection period. This period, which can range from 10 to 16 days, lasted only 10 days in October and was completed several days before the end of the month because the payroll reporting date, November 1st, is early in the cycle. And they further continue with the BLS here. There was no discernible effect on the national unemployment rate from the household survey, which was actually pretty bad in the month of October. So you can wish away the weather all you want. It didn't really raise the variability in the collection process, therefore the variability in the data. Though there was obviously some actual impact on the ground, we may not know how much it is, but as I keep saying, it doesn't actually matter. The noisiness was September, not October. And even according to the BLS's household survey estimates for those people who report they cannot work due to weather, that number was 512,000 in the month of October, but we've seen this before. There was more people who said they couldn't work reported because of weather back in January, back when there was a cold weather snap and blizzard conditions across much of the country back then. And it didn't seem to impact the establishment survey at that time, now did it? There was even a big number of people saying they couldn't work due to weather in July. So the fact that the weather did impact the economy and the labor market, I mean, that absolutely happened. But it does not explain the level of weakness that we're seeing. But for the mainstream media that is completely invested in the soft landing narrative and anything that Jay Powell says, September is a perfectly good number that we can all rely on, and October is a bunch of weather and Boeing strike noise. I'll give you an example. This morning's non-farm payrolls report for October certainly should be taken with a grain of salt, possibly a whole shaker, according to Rick Pulcinello, who's a senior market strategist at the FT Institute. It appears that this drop was significantly affected by hurricanes Helene and Milton, and to a lesser extent by the Boeing strike. The unemployment rate stayed steady at 4.1%, and it is not affected by storms and strikes, but it is affected by, as we'll see, a whole bunch of people dropping out of the labor force yet again. The household survey, which was not impacted by weather, had its biggest decline in several months. And as I said in the introduction, it is down for a prolonged period, which is consistent with everything else that we've been saying and seeing. Hours, lack of hiring, lack of quitting, the JOLTS numbers, income data. It all points to the same thing. And the establishment survey does even before we get to October. If you remember where we were back in early August, that triggered the carry trade reverse and everything else. Early August, the payroll report was relatively low. It was initially estimated just above 100,000. It's actually been revised slightly higher since then to 144,000. But then August came out and it seemed like everything was better, moving on the right track. The BLS reported the following month in September that the August payroll estimate was 159,000. So moving in the right direction. Then September comes in at 254 and everybody's like, recession? What recession? Now we're into the soft landing. It's been confirmed by a single payroll report in September. But it wasn't just September. It was the increase in August that looked like the jobs market was heading back in the right direction. Now, according to the latest revisions, August was actually even worse than July had been, even the initial report in July, and September not so robust as it first appeared. So now we have July at 144,000. August, rather than being 159 and moving in the right direction, now the BLS says, oh no, it wasn't 159, it was actually 78. So we go from 159 to 78. Imagine what would have happened in early September had the BLS, instead of saying 159, said, oh, we went from 100 and something to 78. It would have triggered a completely different reaction at the time. So instead, we get 78 for August. September's revised down to 223. And now October comes in at just plus 12. Whether or not there's hurricanes and strikes, it doesn't really matter. The trend is there. And keep in mind, always keep in mind, that these numbers, as they are, even the revised ones that get revised lower on these short-run bases, it's actually even worse. The baseline, the QCEW, which in 2023 to early 2024 is going to subtract about 73,000 per average off of the payroll report numbers. Even giving the BLS the benefit of the doubt with these revised estimates, the summertime still looks like basically everything else. There was a bad stumble in the labor market. And as I said, it's even worse when you look at just private payroll. Going back to June's payroll for just private firms was less than 100,000 already. That was repeated in July with just 99,000. And then initially the BLS reported for August a slight increase to 114,000. And then September comes in at 223. So it looks like the labor market, the private labor market, bottoms out around June and July and then starts to get better in August and September. But now under the revised estimates, what the BLS shows instead is 97,000 June, 99,000 July, and just 37,000 in August before a lesser 192 in September, the outlier there, and then minus 28 in October. So October, if you take away the hurricanes and the strikes, probably not going to be minus 28, though. Again, when you factor in the other benchmark revisions that are coming, in reality, it probably is closer to zero than not. But it continues the same trend. It's the September number that shows up as the outlier, the noise. The establishment survey, even the establishment survey, after we get through these revisions, looking past weather and strikes, what it shows is that the economy, the labor market, is indeed in effing big trouble. When we look at the establishment survey by a couple industries, manufacturing was obviously impacted the most by the Boeing strike, and manufacturing jobs fell by 46,000 in October. But the strike only impacted around 33,000 workers, so even without the strikes, there was likely a decline in manufacturing jobs in October, which would not have been the first time. In fact, over the last 5 months, manufacturing jobs have contracted and shrunk in 4 of those. And the total over those 5 months is minus 88,000. So even if you have 33,000 due to Boeing, which is what everybody's reporting, you still have around 50,000 jobs being lost over the last 5 months in manufacturing anyway. And it's not just manufacturing. Look at retail jobs. Retail jobs have been down in 4 of the 5 months since May as well. And over those 5 months, minus 28.6 thousand, with only a 6.4 thousand job loss in October. Temporary jobs absolutely crashed in the month of October, down almost 50,000 in the single month alone. But temporary work has been down substantially over all 5 months. In fact, it's been revised quite a bit lower. Temp jobs are absolutely collapsing here, which is a critical cyclical signal for the entire economy. The easiest thing to do when you're trying to cut and control your labor costs is to get rid of temp workers. You don't have to fire your own employees. You can fire employees that are someone else's. So temp jobs have crashed by nearly 150,000 over this same 5-month period. That's not a good sign. And because of that, professional business services jobs have been basically on the same level lower, which means that other professional business services industries beside temp workers are not hiring anybody either. So there's no hiring there. There's tons of job losses, and that's long before we get to October. So in these highly cyclical industries and what are highly cyclical indications, it's not about October at all. It's about the clear deceleration and clear deterioration in these cyclical industries in employment leading up to October. September was the outlier. That's where the noise is, not October and storms and strikes. As the BLS said, the hurricanes did not impact the collection rates or anything that they could tell on the household survey side. And the household survey dropped by 368,000, which is its first decline since the month of May. And we look back over the last 6 months, again, showing you this is not just about October. Over the last 6-month period, the net change is just 5,000. And going back to the last 13 months to last year, when we noted that there was an inflection in the labor market, the household survey measure of employment is down 54,000 over more than a year. So it's not really about the job losses there as it is confirming the lack of hiring, and not just in October, but for a very prolonged period. Full-time jobs on the household survey side, those fell by 164,000 in the month of October. But over the last 6 months, full-time jobs are down almost 400,000. And going back in the same 13-month period, full-time jobs are down more than 600,000. Part-time jobs have been making up for some of those full-time jobs. Over the last 6 months, part-time jobs have increased by 216,000. And over the last 13 months, they've increased by 586,000. So when you put all these together, you can see what's happening. It's exactly what we've been saying. According to the household survey, employment has been flat, which is just like JOLTS telling us that no one is hiring. Full-time jobs are being converted to part-time jobs, which is the cutting in hours. Employers are taking proactive steps to control their costs, and they've been doing this for more than just the last few months. As I've been saying since last year, the number of macroeconomic accounts that look solid and soft landing and strong and resilient continues to migrate toward downturn, recession, and maybe even worse. And we've got to the point where it's gone on so long and gotten to be so far, even the establishment survey is more and more looking like the household survey and everything else. There's a consistent picture that just isn't the one that everybody would like it to be. It's not a recovery. It's not a resilient and strong economy. It's not a soft landing. It's one that more and more resembles what you see entering recessions. As far as the unemployment rate goes, well, In the month of October, that was affected by 220,000 former workers dropping out of the labor force. So while the household survey dropped by nearly 400,000, that meant the number of official unemployed increased by 150,000. 220,000 dropped out of the labor force. So the unemployment rate ticked up a little bit, but not enough to flip and round up to 4.2% from 4.1% where it had been in September. But if you actually adjust for all of these labor force dropouts, which means you keep the participation rate constant where it was last fall at the peak, the number of unemployed is undercounted by more than 600,000. And if you put those back into the actual labor force and therefore the unemployment rate calculation, that would make the adjusted unemployment rate 4.5%, which is a new cycle high. So on an apples to more apples comparison, unemployment continues to pile up because there is no hiring, hours are being cut, Americans don't want to quit their jobs, incomes are slowing down as a result, and even the establishment survey is showing exactly that same thing. The jobs market is indeed in big effing trouble. So even without hurricanes, October was going to be weak anyway. We see that in the midst of expectations. So plus 12,000 overall, minus 28 in private. Even without strikes and hurricanes, you're at a low number anyway because they've been low numbers all along. It's just now that the BLS is getting around with its revisions to reflect that reality. September was the outlier. There was weakness heading into the economy and a big stumble in summertime. And as I keep pointing out, this is even before we get to the benchmark revisions, which are a long ways away. We won't get to 2023, 2024 revisions until next March. And then the revisions that are likely to hit where we're talking about now will be the March after that. So keep that in mind as we go forward. But private payrolls, they were almost certainly negative during the summertime rather than accelerating, looking toward a soft landing after a short run bottoming. Unemployment continues to rise when you factor labor force dropouts. The jobs reports are noisy. They always are. But that noise wasn't October, it was September. Reality has a way of intruding. And reality means that the establishment survey begins to more and more resemble all the rest of the labor market data that has suggested we're on the road to recession, if not already in one already. The jobs market is in big effing trouble, and even the establishment survey says so. How does all of this happen when GDP looks so solid and has looked solid for quite some time? Well, I went over that in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and Eurodollar University subscribers. And until next time, please take care.